Hey everybody, and welcome to the first episode here on Throne Theories, a channel which will focus on deep dive analysis for Game of Thrones, but we are going to start off with the Sarcastic Skim. Sarcastic Skims will go episode by episode, and today we will be going over the pilot, Winter is Coming, but don't worry, the analysis videos will start coming out in the next couple weeks. The series starts with 3 men of the Night's Watch going to track some wildlings, which one of them finds dead and flees back to the others, who, after a brief argument, go back to further inspect. Of course, all the bodies are gone, and I love what the show did here. I'm very glad that they acknowledged that the supernatural elements of the show weren't just superstition, because that's the kind of thing, if you tease too long, it just becomes boring. The one remaining survivor flees and is caught and executed by Ned Stark, who we are starting to get to know. In Winterfell, we see boys doing traditional boy things, girls doing traditional girl things, and an evil glance from Arya towards Sansa. She goes outside, and this is where she immediately becomes one of my favorite characters on the show. She shoots the arrow right past him to the target, gives a little bow, and then dips out. Then, word arrives of the fleeing Night's Watchman, so Ned has to leave and enforce justice. He takes Bran with him, despite his mother's objections, citing that Bran won't be young forever, that winter is coming, and he shows himself to be an old school type of man of honor.
The man who passes a sentence should swing the sword.
Is it Trace or the White Walkers?
The White Walkers have been gone for thousands of years.
But he also shows how little people know of what's north of the Wall when he says that the White Walkers have been gone for thousands of years. From there, they go and find a dead direwolf who had left behind a litter of pups. But rather than kill them, Jon Snow convinces Ned to give one of them to each of his kids, including Jon himself. The direwolf pups do somewhat parallel the owners, but that's for a different episode. Anyways, Ned further shows himself to be a tough, old-school type dad by telling them that they will train the pups themselves, feed them themselves, and if they die, bury them themselves. Of course, Jon gets the runt of litter because he's supposedly Ned's bastard son. From here, we go to King's Landing, where the inciting incident of the whole series is taking place, the death of Jon Arryn, which, sets everything into motion. We also see that Cersei and Jaime Lannister are involved in some shady dealings, though we don't know what yet, and that they both dislike the king.
Well, he's up fucking balls and hunting whores.
Although they're really the last people who should be making sex jokes about others. But anyways, back in Winterfell, news of Jon Arryn's death arrives, as well as news that the king is coming, which he knows means that King Robert wants him to be the new hand. In this next scene, all the guys are getting cleaned up for the queen's arrival, and when I was first watching the show, don't know why, but I was expecting someone to get their throat slit. Anyways, Bran sees the king's procession and comes climbing down the wall. His mother sees him, is pissed because she had told him not to, and makes him promise not to do it again.
I promise.
Do you know what?
What?
You always look at your feet before you lie.
Now, why would you ever tell a kid that? Like, why would you tip your hand? I mean, maybe when they're grown, but definitely not now. As the king is arriving, Arya tries to sneak back in wearing her soldier helmet and gets caught, and she pushes her brother aside. You can already tell she's going to be a little badass. Oh, come on, Sansa. Haven't you ever seen Harry Potter? Never trust the pasty-ass blonde kid. We can tell how good the relationship between Ned and King Robert is by how easily they exchange fat jokes. We also get a glimpse of the contentious relationship between the king and queen when he ignores her to go visit the grave of his true love, which is Ned's sister, Lyanna Stark. And of course, there is way more to that story, which the show gets into much later. We learn a lot about King Robert down in the tombs. We learn that he does have a sense of humor, and we begin to learn what would be the basis for Robert's rebellion, which is how he became king. We also get our first glimpse at Tyrion, who will become one of my favorite characters, but not quite yet. And then we go across the narrow sea to Pentos, where we meet the surviving children of the king that was killed during Robert's rebellion, Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen. Viserys is convinced that the Iron Throne will be his, and has decided to give his sister over to Khal Drogo in order to secure use of the Dothraki army.
When they write the history of my reign, sweet sister, they will say it began today.
When they write the history of my reign, they will say it began with me fondling my sister's titties. Yeah, I know my British accent sucks. I was actually surprised when this first happened when I was watching the show, but as it turned out, a little fondling between siblings is nothing in Game of Thrones. She takes a bath before meeting Khal Drogo, where we first get a hint at her being the mother of dragons when the hot water doesn't burn her, And at the presentation, Khal Drogo is pleased, because, how could you not be? Her reluctance to be Drogo's bride and her brother's response to it.
I would let his whole tribe fuck you. All 40,000 men and their horses too, if that's what it took.
Lay the framework for her anti-slavery platform and view of herself as a liberator. Back at Winterfell, we see that Sansa is a fairly stereotypical early teenage girl and is desperate to be queen, a trait to keep an eye out on. And we also see Uncle Benjen, a member of the Night's Watch, as well as the first hints that Jon Snow wants to join despite his uncle's warnings. From there, Tyrion and Jon share some tense words over their mutual experience of being the black sheep of the family. Tense words are also exchanged between Cat Stark and Cersei, as it seems Sansa and Prince Joffrey will be married, and the tensions continue with Jaime insulting Ned, and Ned calmly diffusing the situation with a low-key threat.
I don't fight in tournaments. Just when I fight a man for real. I don't want to know what I can do.
Later that night, while Cat is trying to convince Ned not to become the King's Hand, she receives a letter from her sister saying that Jon Arryn was actually murdered. Despite his wife's pleas, he decides to take the position and investigate. Back across the sea at Dany and Drogo's wedding, we get a glimpse of how wild the Dothraki are, since a wedding without at least 3 deaths is considered dull, and Dany gets 3 dragon eggs, as well as an introduction to Ser Jorah Mormont, both of which will be significant. In Winterfell, as Ned is preparing to leave, Bran climbs up the wall to see him off, and ends up seeing Jaime and Cersei together instead. This opens up potential problems with who the rightful heir is, and sparks the tensions between the Starks and the Lannisters when Jaime pushed Bran off to end the episode. Well, thanks for watching this first episode here on Throne Theories. Keep an eye out for more on the way, especially the analysis episodes. So please like, comment, subscribe, and let me know any thoughts you have down in the comment section.